The Sustainable Voice, bringing you big successes from small places worldwide.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sustainable Voice. This is Ashish, and as you can see, I'm not in the studio. Hey Leigh, how's it going?
Hi, Ashish. I wish I'm in my studio, but I wish I were with you and Chris right now.
Yes, and then we're in a secret location. No, we're not really. I make it sound like we're in a bunker somewhere. So this is Chris, by the way. So those you know, so Chris is actually one of the most premier guides in Peru. He is basically my brother. Leigh you got to know Chris really well during the pandemic. We were live streaming local restaurants here. Anybody here want some advice on the best local restaurants that aren't named Astrid, Gaston, or Central? This is the guy. He knows where all the restaurants that are owned by locals are, right?
That's right.
So we got to know each other really well during the pandemic, and Chris is also an archaeologist by background, but I thought it'd be a right fit because as you can tell, we're in Peru. And I'm in the Sacred Valley right now at one of my favorite hotels. And so Chris was here, and it was very spur of the moment. We were having lunch, and I said, "Hey, Chris, do you feel like recording a podcast?" And typical Chris, sure, let's go.
Yeah, and that's also typical as shit. She's coming out with ideas like, sure, let's do it.
Let's go.
Why not?
I love it. I was
So
excited when I found out Chris was going to be with us today.
So this is going to be either a spectacular train wreck or a spectacular episode. Either way, it's going to be spectacular.
It can't,
Uh,
it can't, it can't be anything but spectacular with
we're
Chris.
gonna get
That's right.
we're gonna accelerate our listener base. The growth has been just amazing. Thank you all for those of you
Mhm.
listening. The growth has been amazing, and you know this is why I believe we're getting so many new listeners. The fact that we're willing to take chances and think on this on the fly and be able to create content that either you may want to hear or that you should hear or that you need to hear.
Mhm.
And this podcast is about big successes in small places. And I have to preface it because when we talk about big successes in small places and local heroes, this man next to me is a local hero. In my eyes, he is. I know he's blushing right now, but in my eyes, he is. When you see some of the things he does for local community here, when you see some of the things he was doing when people were stuck at Machu Picchu. This man walked from Machu Picchu down to Sacred Valley. How long did it take you to walk there?
It's like 10 or 12 hours.
Yep.
Wow.
And why did you do it?
I mean, walking back because we had to. The government wouldn't find a solution as quick as we thought, and we had to just end up hiking back and try to find a solution and bring the help to the people who need it before the government did.
See my point?
Amazing, Chris. That's incredible. So you hiked all that way by yourself, and then did you hike back up?
Actually, it was my brother and myself because we got stuck there with a group of visitors, and the government just couldn't find a solution as quick as we would like to. So we ended hiking back to the Secret Valley, eventually somehow finding a ride back to the city of Cusco. And luckily by then, as we were trying to, figure everything out for everyone, um, everyone started to get first in line to get evacuated to the city of Cusco. And then eventually all of the help was sent to Aguascalientes back then. But it took about 5 months to solve everything. But we all did a little bit for everyone.
So here's the part that I love asking. If you had to walk back up there, would you have?
For sure.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you
Why
go.
not?
You
Like
didn't
I
even
said,
have to think about that.
local hero.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's exactly why, and that's why he's on this podcast. That's why we wanted to introduce him to our listeners, right, Leigh? I mean, you and I have gotten to know Chris really well.
Mhm.
We've all and think about it. I was today we were talking about it on the ride over to this hotel. Over the span of the last 5 years, we have gotten Chris nearly arrested. We have gotten him kicked out of ruins. We have gotten him stared at a restaurant while he's ordering. We've gotten him drunk on pisco sours, because we kept streaming. Uh,
Oh, right. I forgot about that because we were making him give us virtual tours all over, and he was going and ordering
yeah.
drinks, and
Yep.
this is during the height of the pandemic. Yeah, I
Got
remember
got
that.
it. Got him almost kicked out of that restaurant, but we got him tons of free food all over town. So there's that too, right? Well, I mean, he was
For
eating well.
sure.
There was that, and then how could I also forget? I mean, we also had him basically, gosh, what was that? I mean, you almost got arrested. You had you hiking back. You getting free food. Oh, we had him hiking all over Peru, finding new trails, new parts of the original Inca Trail.
True.
So he was hiking everywhere else. I mean, we've put you through the ringer, man. Why are you even here? I thought by
I
now I wouldn't even be. If I were you, I wouldn't even talk to us.
I don't
No,
know.
and then he took us to those ruins that um
Oh, behind his house.
those
Yeah, there's
ruins
that too.
behind his house.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. So he was talking about pagan rituals at behind his house as well. So it was that too, sacrificing and whatnot and everything else.
Yes, you mean the archaeological remains
Yeah,
behind my
yeah.
house?
So
Yes,
we had him we
yes.
had we
Yeah.
had him looking at archaeological remains. I'm sure if we found human remains, we'd have him hold those too.
Oh God.
Is there anything we haven't done to you? And
Um,
now we have you
Don't
on
give
the
him any
podcast.
ideas, Chris. Don't give him any ideas.
Now we have you on the podcast.
I know, but happy to be here to cooperate,
Is that's what you call this cooperation, huh?
right? Because you guys are growing up like crazy with.
We were talking about sacrificing during the ride over here and the ritual of sacrificing. Who knew you'd be the one we're sacrificing?
Exactly. Who knew?
Wow, I'm telling you. Well, it's a beautiful day. I mean, I tell you what, you know what? We don't normally do this, but I'm going to turn this camera around just to show you what our view is, okay? So
You
give me
can
one
see it in
second.
the
I'm going to do that
reflection.
right now. Hold on.
Oh wow.
Not too shabby.
Not
Not too
too
shabby.
shabby. Not too shabby. Are those fruit trees?
I don't know. What are those trees?
Oh, we got some apples, peach,
Cactus.
prickly
That's
pear, I guess.
so beautiful.
And now you're back to us.
Where are you?
We're in the Sacred Valley.
But what hotel?
It's called Soli Luna is the name of this hotel.
Mm-hmm.
This is like a second home to me, this hotel. The owner, the staff that's here. Last year, Chris remembers I was here with the family. My daughter got a UTI. Do you remember we came back and we were talking about the women that were up in the Sacred Valley?
Mm-hmm.
I was here. I was
Oh,
here when this happened. And so this is where I always come. My daughter got sick when we were here, and my wife got sick, and Chris was by their side the entire time. They were just incredible here. They've
mm.
always been incredible here. And I just realized something as I walked in. This is the exact same room.
Is that right?
It's the exact same room. So I'm not going to complain. So
So great.
so I thought Chris would be the ideal person to talk about, the subject we started in the last episode. So just to bring everybody up to speed, those of you, who remember the last episode, we were talking about whose land is it anyway, right? We were talking about some of the challenges that are being faced with indigenous communities in countries where, whether it's unintended consequences or whether it's intentional, that the land is being taken from them, right? So, and it's because controls weren't put in place. You're the perfect person to ask. In Peru, because we didn't talk too much about Peru. So before we jump into solutions, is this an issue in Peru? And if it is, tell me how we got here.
It certainly is an issue here in Peru. And so if we specifically talk about the region where I live, which is Cusco, nearby the Sacred Valley, not too far away from here, a lot of communities suffer from the fact that there's a lot of mining and not necessarily illegal, but they're just taking a lot of their land and polluting everything that they have, promising them, some sort of solutions and a balanced way of living, but it's not necessarily happening. And I can see that it's being reflected in many other places in the country.
Well, and there are how many indigenous communities roughly are there in Peru?
Oh, that's a tough question. I'm gonna say quite a few hundreds of thousands
So, and
easily.
is it a struggle for them? I mean, do they are land was obvious. I know land was taken from them, during settlement periods, and all that land can't have been given back.
Not really. Not all of it has been given back. As a matter of fact, once it's lost, it's gone, and their territories are getting more and more, let's say, restricted to smaller places where they can actually do what they've been doing for hundreds of years, which is either raising llamas and alpacas, now they're sheep, or simply farming. Even above 12,000, 13,000 feet, these guys live out of the production of quinoa, corn, and massive array of potatoes. So if they're just a little portion of their lands are taken away from it, it's crucial for their survival.
So this is interesting because Leigh, you and I were talking about this last time, right?
Hmm.
It's we talked about the controls that weren't in place in the beginning. I know hindsight's 2020. I'll tell you, something just happened yesterday. And this is going to be very controversial, but this happened yesterday. You know the Tompkins family, right? And the
Hmm.
Patagonia brand. So I have a colleague who's in Chile right now she's trying to, we've been beating her head against the wall, trying to build this really community-based model in Chile within some parts of Patagonia. What absolutely astounded me, we on the outside look at that whole Patagonia region and go, wow, these people donated on the land of what is Patagonia. What we uncovered, and this is, I know this is not new to some people, but I have to preface it, because we know we're going to have listeners in Chile. I have to preface it by the fact that for outsiders, it is new. For people not in that country, it is new. Like, I'm going to explain this, and you're going to probably think it's new, and Leigh, you're going to be shocked by this. But it fits into exactly what we're talking about, unintended consequences. Here we are talking about how this land was given back and it was fantastic. Come to find out that the people who gave this land to make Patagonia by the indigenous communities are seen as conquerors. They're seen as, I don't want to say slave owners, but it's pretty close to it. And what we were told yesterday, this is just yesterday, was the separation between the indigenous community and the people who gave donated the land, in terms of the valley between their ideologies coming together, is about as wide as a Jewish and a Muslim religion, that wide.
Hmm.
And it's because it's seen as conquerors there. And we're sitting here saying, wow, you donated that land. Meanwhile, the indigenous people are saying, how'd you get that land in the first place? It wasn't
What
yours
was
to
theirs?
begin.
It
It
was theirs.
wasn't yours to begin with. How are you
Yeah.
giving back what was already ours? Now, we're not going to get into the middle of that because there's two sides to every story. But could you think about that, right? I mean, this is you. Everybody knows the Patagonia family.
Hmm.
Everybody knows that story. I mean, what are your thoughts on hearing that for the first time?
Well, I kind of overheard it actually on, was it a Peruvian newspaper? Was it Peru 21? I want to say. But actually, as you said, it reflects a lot to what's been going on here. And actually, although it sounds awkward to say that those lands are given back to who were first to take those lands from who they didn't even own it. I can see that being reflected here in Peru, but sadly, a lot of those lands are simply not given back whatsoever.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
totally lost.
Leigh, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, it makes me really sad, and I get back to how did we get here, but what it brings to mind for me is that what was just in the headlines yesterday in Alaska, which is close to my heart, where the Alaska Native Corporation is actually going to, and I guess they'll keep control, but in Juneau, they're working with Royal Caribbean to build a whole complex over on the other side of Douglas Island. When Juneau's trying to control how much tourism is coming in, the Native Corporation has land is actually getting in a partnership with a large corporation. And what's going to happen down the road? You ask, how did we
Right.
get here? What happens down the road with that? Will they keep their land, or will something happen down the road where it's
Well,
taken from them?
the question you just asked, exactly. How do we get here, right? And you just proved the point. So the two corporations are putting this together without any thought, forward thinking, right?
Hmm.
Without any thought to what about 5 years from now? What about our children? What about our children's children? What happens here? We talk about Patagonia, it's the same thing, right? It's not intentional. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We weren't in the room, so there's no way for us to know what the conversation was. But it's still an unintended consequence. In your
Hmm.
case, you're talking about land that was claimed by settlers, right? So obviously none of us were in the room. That's going back centuries. But there's still a way to make it right. And I get it, right? When you are part of an institution, whether it's a government, whether it's a private enterprise, whether it's a community, whether it's a corporation, whether it's a conservancy, whatever the case may be, just simply saying, okay, well, sorry, here you go, here's the land. It does. Yeah, that's not as easy to do, right? Like my wife's family, they all left Uganda during the Idi Amin Idi Amin Empire regime, I guess. They can't go back and get their land. It's been resold 3 times. So they don't even know where their land is. This time around when I went back in February, I drove through Jinja, which is where they're from. It still looks the same. And they were asking me, are those farms still there? Yeah, they're still there. Is this? I'm sending them videos. Yep, that looks exactly like it was. There's no way of knowing which land was there because the plot lines have all been redrawn. And the original plot lines don't exist. And I suspect it's the same thing in Peru with the indigenous communities. The original plot lines that was their land probably doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yes, that is the case. Not only the government, but specifically the Minister of Culture or Training and so on are taking over a lot of the lands by promising the communities the moon,
Yeah.
but
And not delivering.
not necessarily, not the way they promised at first, at first, Maybe at the very first there's some to make people happy, but after all, in the future, it's not sustainable at all, or at least as they planned it or promised at first.
I remember this brings me back to 2000, probably almost 15, 20 years ago. There was a particular community in the Amazon, on the Ecuadorian side of the Amazon, that we had gone to, and we were trying to, there was a lodge that was there. We are trying to support the lodge and really get to understand the people there. And there was a threat to the people because there was a large corporation who was, as you said, promising the moon to these people. In this case, was promising them, large screen TVs and all this electronics and infrastructure and everything else and whatnot. And they did, and they infiltrated the community. And one day the rug was pulled out from the lodge, right? They had to close the lodge. The rug was pulled out from under them because somebody in the community sold out and infiltrated everything else, right? They bought in. You know what happened? They gave them the big screen TV. They gave them the electronics. They gave them everything. You know what they didn't give them? Electricity. So they end up living in poverty, and you can't go back from that, right? So let's talk about, again, if we couldn't answer how did we get here from 300 years ago, we should be able to answer where we go from here, so that 300 years from now we're not asking the same question again. So that's why the title of this episode is One for Me, Three for You. Right? The one for me, three for you rule. And it's important when we talk about that because this is a successful model. It's a land conservation trust. I'll start with you in Peru. Let's say you were the Minister of Culture. Okay. That's who's in charge of all this indigenous land, I would assume, right?
Partially.
Okay. Who else will be in charge?
Well, the government is all state-owned land.
Okay, so it's all state-owned land. Imagine if you were the person who was, and you were, for lack of better words, only because we're in election mode in the US, you're the czar, you're the land czar. And I come to you and I tell you, or whoever tells you, okay, we don't know where the land plots lie. So let's do this. Let's take all the land that's state-owned. We know it's indigenous. Let's ask the people to, amongst themselves, and it's going to be difficult, it's going to be contentious, it's going to be probably argumentative. You figure out whose land this area is, and we'll redraw the plot lines, right? Go back through your historical documents if you have them, and if you're an indigenous community who's laying stake to this land, then you have to be able to back that up. You can't just say, okay, it's mine. Once you figure out whose land it is, then at that point, deal with use, allow us to use 1 acre, and we'll pay you for that 1 acre, and you keep 3 acres for whatever you want to do with it. And here's some rules of how we can coexist. And we did that for every single element of the hundreds of thousands of acres. Would that work?
I think it's a good beginning, or it's a good idea. Is, after all, these people or the indigenous people are the closest descendants to our ancestors, and I think they had such a superb way of organizing themselves that we should look back or look at them or how organize themselves to keep such harmony within the people in the communities and the various of panacas or ayllus, as we call them, groups of peoples and families that a community about. So I think it's a good start because we come from there. Is thank to them, we should get a portion, but we should give them
even
extra
the portion we're using, we're leasing it from them.
Exactly.
So it's all theirs. we're leasing it from them. So or then there's two models, right? So one model is basically a conservancy model where all the land is leased, right? So where basically they put all their land up for lease, and we take 1 acre, somebody else takes an acre, somebody else takes an acre, but they get revenue sharing, and then they get jobs of the properties, and they work in those hotels, they work in tourism, whatever the case may be, right? They have grazing rights, they have agriculture. And that's something that works in northern Kenya. The second model is what you just said. Okay, we don't, let us have this 1 acre, right? We'll draft draft up a document that says that, a 50-year right to ownership, then a 100-year right to ownership, whatever the case it is, right? And it's clear historical documents from this point. It's almost like a reset button. This is from this point. Okay, in 50 years, this is what's going to happen. In 100 years, this is what's going to happen. So long after we're gone, these documents, like our Constitution, like a Declaration of Independence, like any kind of a charter, a country charter, this is a land charter. It basically is in place, and it cannot be misinterpreted. It's black and white. The 3 acres you have there, let's set up some controls to make sure that there's no human wildlife conflict, that we're not competing with each other, we're not destroying the land, so there's no illegal dumping, there's no garbage, there's no this, no substance abuse, no growing illegal drugs, no doing, and there's controls in place. So those two models, Leigh, if you were in Alaska and you're talking about what's happening there, would that model work in the
Yeah, maybe. Although if I were the one that claimed rightful ownership to the land as an indigenous person, I don't think I'd want anybody telling me how I could conduct myself on my land.
Sure.
That's the only.
Sure, and
Yeah.
that's a fair point. And we wouldn't be telling them how to conduct themselves. We'd be simply saying, these are the ways you can destroy your land. We just want you to make sure. So if you're dumping toxic chemicals, this was going to happen in 50 years to the water table. So don't do this. Because then you're ruining it for everybody at that point. But along those lines, so you said it was the NDC, right? Is what you said up in Alaska?
Yeah, it's the Alaska Native Corporation, and they're very well organized and very business savvy and smart, and they've done good things with their land. I think that really help their community. So they probably have some fail safes that will just make sure that they don't ever lose their land. But it does make you wonder,
Talk about that corporation. Who started that corporation? Where did it come from? Because I'm
Oh
not
man,
familiar with
I
it.
don't know. I mean, it's the difference, the Tlingit and the Haida, clans that are there, tribes that are there, and they are very, there's a lot of tourism in Alaska that they actually control. Icy Strait Point is theirs, and the tram in Juneau is theirs, and there's land in Ketchikan, so they've always been very involved in tourism. Um, you know, they are pretty savvy that way.
So why I asked that question is because that's a third solution.
Hmm.
Nothing like that exists here. Having an actual corporation. I mean, what is the purpose of that corporation? I mean, the name makes it pretty obvious, but I don't want to assume anything. So if you can give me a snapshot of what the purpose of that corporation is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I would think, to sum it up, it's for them to have control over their cultural history, for them to have control and say over how their land is used, and then for them to use that to bring all of their people up, rise up, um, through that. I mean, I think they even own maybe some boat companies, and are
Okay.
involved in, you know they're very focused, but their culture runs deep, and they have beautiful museums and beautiful cultural, they're very grounded in their culture and very
How is
protective of it.
how is their leadership made up of? Is it members of the community? Is it external members?
Oh no,
How
I
is
mean, I
their
think it's all members of the community, and board members, and all their board members. They may have some outside people from, but I would imagine not. For the
yeah.
most part, they're pretty, even with the people they try to hire within their community as
So
well.
it's like a council of elders, basically.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. I
They're
mean,
very
it's
wealthy. They're very well organized.
okay. So, Chris, who speaks for the indigenous people here? A corporation like that, who speaks for them?
I guess it's pretty much the leaders of the community
Yeah.
whom are given their words spread by um their how you say the ones who represents them in the city or in the Congress.
Okay.
Now
But is
that
there a central privatized or cooperative corporation like this that is one voice for everybody? Because Kenya has that with the Northern Rangelands Trust in the
Mhm.
northern part of Kenya. It's basically one voice for a collection of communities, of Samburu communities in the northern part of Kenya. But is there one voice here that speaks for, and again, it's not going to be perfect, but it's a megaphone, right? Is there one voice like what Leigh's talking about that exists here?
I can think of one honestly. I'm gonna say is the ones who we elect to represent us or represent them in the congressman.
In their district, basically.
Exactly,
So you have
because
10 voices, not one voice,
at least,
at
yeah,
least.
yeah.
And you know what? I think we just stumbled upon a solution that isn't even what we talked about. I think Leigh, you may have just actually been the
Well, and
catalyst.
I will read, I've just looked it up. So there are actually 12 geographic regions, and the regional and village corporations come
Mhm.
together as a whole, and they are owned by the Alaska Native people through privately owned shares of corporate stock.
Okay.
And they are the largest landholder in all of Alaska,
There you go. There it
actually.
is. There it is. They're the largest landholder. So there's that land
Hmm.
conservation trust. So which
Hmm.
means that the indigenous land is basically held in protection.
Yeah, so
It's
they have
almost
13 different associations under the
Mhm.
umbrella
There it is.
of the
There it
corporation.
is. There it is. That's the Northern Rangelands Trust in northern
Hmm.
Kenya. That's
Same
what that
thing, huh?
is.
Yeah.
That's what doesn't exist with this pastoral Maasai in Tanzania. There's no
Hmm.
such thing. That's what doesn't exist. All the different communities that are in Patagonia right now that are resenting whoever it is, right? Whether it's a hotelier, whether it's the Patagonia people, whoever it is, there's no one voice. I remember a conversation that I had with a lodge in Australia that was trying to set up in the Blue Mountains a land conservation trust with the indigenous communities in the Blue Mountains. And there wasn't a voice, so they had to go to the communities. And as they were about to go through forward to this community, another community showed up and said, "No, that's our land." And they had to back off and say, "All right, guys, you guys figure out whose land it is. Once you figure that out, then we'll talk." But if you start looking at all of them, let's take another another example. We talked about Kenya, we talked about Tanzania, we talked about Peru. Where else in the world have you seen this? Where that you know of?
Uh, haven't heard that in the US, I
Oh,
believe
of
it's
course,
all
of
over the
course.
place.
Okay, so let's talk about the U.S. We're talking about obviously about the natives in the U.S. Okay, within the native communities, indigenous communities in the U.S. You've got one voice in each state, but is there one voice at the federal level?
Oh man, I'm so ignorant. I'm pretty sure there's a federal department of
No, there
yeah,
is. Yeah. Sorry.
but
No,
I don't know
there
what
is.
it is.
That's just it. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah,
It's not spoken about enough. But what you just described in Alaska, that applies at a federal level.
yeah.
It could easily apply. Could you imagine if every single community, if every single indigenous community in the U.S., right, whether you are the Iroquois, whether you are the Cherokee, whatever the case is, right, whatever background you're from, you have your individual state, like what you have here, the representatives for each district. In this case, and I say that by state because when you go to other places, most states don't have what you have in Alaska.
Hmm.
Like if you get, like I remember when I was living in Arizona, there was not a central voice for every single
Mm,
community in Arizona. It was individual counties. There was somebody in that municipality that was talking for them, not at the state level. You're talking
mm,
about something at the state level
hmm.
that's happening. So there's two things that are missing that are perfect solutions. One is a uniform approach, right? Something that works like this. Again, whatever the policy is, and you said it best, it's a start,
Mhm,
right? It's a
mhm.
start, but a uniform approach, taking that start and applying it uniformly. As a global society, that's the one thing that I think we fail miserably at is whether it's trying to apply, rules for vaccination or for a pandemic or rules for medical safety or rules for embargoes or trade or whatever the case. It's no uniform application. There's no uniform math. Everybody comes up with their own math. So one country says 1 + 1 = 2. The other country says 2 + 2 = 5. There's no uniform application. Here, we just this is a solution. This is a real, tangible solution. Why isn't every single state in the US going and speaking to this corporation in Alaska? Why isn't, why isn't the government of Kenya opening up the Northern Regions Trust as a best case study? And again, as I know it's not perfect, but as an example to Tanzania, to Peru, to Ecuador, to, Argentina, wherever. Fill in the gaps, right? Why isn't there? In South Africa, it's the same problem with the Zulus. If you go into KwaZulu-Natal, go into those places, you have the battlefields, you have the specific land, but that land area for the Zulus, yes, is protected, but there's a lot more that isn't. So two parts to this then, right? So Chris, let's ask you, in Peru, if you had a 1-for-3 solution to start. So you had, let's say you were the head of, first of all, if a corporation like what Leigh's talking about Alaska existed in Peru, would that be a start for you?
Certainly.
Okay.
Certainly. Definitely having the voices to be heard from the different communities, which I believe we have in a way from the local governors, let's say the mayors and the governors of the regions, and eventually the congressmen who we actually elect them all. Although we don't necessarily believe everything that they promise, but it's still, their way somehow because they belong to many of these communities, as a matter of fact. So
what if they were all members of, instead of being part of Congress, what if they were like a union, members of a cooperative, members of that? Yes, you still keep the elected officials, but you have a lobbying group that's one voice that basically keeps the congressman.
It's a dream.
Honest. I know it's a dream.
It's a dream.
Okay, so that's
trending numbers, right?
That means it's a start. That means it's a possibility. So in essence, I mean, think about this, right? I mean, Leigh, if I go back to your example, Alaska, would it be a fair statement to say that this corporation, one of their rules is also keeping officials honest, elected officials honest? Does that be one of their, and whether it's intended or unintended, it may not be written in their bylaws.
Yeah, probably is. It probably is. I mean, they've because they have, everybody's a shareholder, and they themselves have, accountability. I would imagine that also means that on a federal level that they, a state level that they,
I mean, I'm thinking about this also. So I was part of a congressional caucus that went to DC and met with a couple of different representatives on Capitol Hill. And while it was effective, it could have been a lot more effective if there was one voice. Now, our listeners should not take this as me sanctioning or not sanctioning unions. I'm not taking sides on that. That's a lightning rod in itself. I'm not taking sides on that. I'm simply talking, I'm sitting here in Peru, so taking, again, Chris, you and I haven't rehearsed this. So this is you're listening to brand new ideas, and they seem to be resonating.
Yes, absolutely. I wish our also voices could be heard.
Yeah.
Heard. So that union idea of gathering all of us within the same path onto the same objective together, strength in numbers for the same objective.
You'd keep your elected officials honest. I mean, you and I talked years ago about just corruption with the elected officials here. And it's not unique to Peru, but it is a major issue. We just look what happened here in 2022. We had a whole episode on instability, political instability in countries like Peru. And we had a whole episode talking about how that has to happen in young economies, young democracies. That's part of the rite of passage. Unfortunately, it is. But that doesn't mean we have to keep repeating it. So there's two parts to this. So the first part is what Leigh's just suggesting, having a corporation that is basically one voice for all the communities here. Because you said there are hundreds of thousands of indigenous communities, right? Nobody really knows. And again, somebody listening would say, no, there's 45 or there's 55. My answer to you is that you know of. That you know of, right? I mean, there's countless communities. I mean, we talked about the robot project, the Kipi in the Amazon. There's countless communities in the Peruvian Amazon that nobody even recognizes because their dialect's not being protected.
We still have nomad groups of people traveling in circles around the
right
forest.
Right. So you have all of that, and you start putting all that together. So the first part is having a unions are maybe not the right word, but a centralized voice, one voice that speaks for everybody. And it's not easy, right? I mean, getting people to agree to a movement, a collective bargaining is not easy. I mean, if it was easy, everybody would do it. Obviously, it's but the person in charge of that's going to be got to have the hardest job in the world, harder than being
And
an
electing
elected
that person, who's
official.
going to be the right?
Right.
How do they get it?
How do you
do
keep
they
them
earn the
honest?
trust?
Right.
Mhm.
Right. How do you earn their trust? So that's again all valid questions, right? But the second part of that is then having a set formula, mathematical formula for everybody to follow that says, okay, we don't know whose land this was. We know it's not ours. You were here before us, right? So we know it's would you say use Pachamama, right? So it's would you what's the phrase? Pachamama's land, right?
Yes, state-owned land, Pachamama. She's where we come from. She's
Yeah.
where everything we have comes from her.
Yeah.
And
So-
reciprocity, right? We should give it back to her.
So if we're giving it back to her, then the stewards of her land is who should have that land.
Exactly.
So, and the stewards of those land are the people who got here long before us. So if that's the case, now the second part of the equation, right? The first part is what we just talked about, the having unified voice. The second part is basically saying, okay, well, this land was divvied up a long time ago by the settlers. We'd like to be able to give it back, but having a free-for-all when we don't know who owns the land and we don't know how it comes in, let's do a 1-for-3. A 1-for-3 ratio. So look, as a state-owned, we would like to ask your permission to maintain 1 acre for every 3 acres for what we have, whether there's a road that goes through that land. We can't just destroy the road, right? Or there's a levy that we will help pay, we'll pay you through concession fees on that road. The whole idea of Robin Hood and the Merry Men and what's the forest called that Robin Hood went through?
Oh God.
Yeah, you don't know either. You were about
No.
to roll your eyes, but you don't know either.
I don't know.
But the Merry Men and it's not the Enchanted Forest. That's something else. But it is, it's kind of a similar concept, right? Where basically whether there's a road there or there's something already there, for all we know, there could be a hotel there or whatever the case may be, right? Or an archaeological dig there, archaeological site there, whatever the case. Okay. All of it. Okay. Can we please work out a deal where the 1 acre we have, we can't just uproot civilization completely. The idea is to try to be able to find some sort of balance. But for every acre we have, we'll find 3 acres for you within that land. And there's a lock. And no matter what happens, no matter how much your population grows, no matter how much our needs grow, no matter how much our roads, the more roads we need, more infrastructure we need, that 1-for-3 ratio is a lock. That if that happened in Tanzania, where from the very beginning the Maasai were moved from the Serengeti to the Ngorongoro and said, okay, we're moving you here, but we're going to keep a permanent lock of 1-for-3. For every acre we're using in the conservation area, you keep 3 acres, right? It's a conservation, you keep 3 acres. So whatever the ratio is, if we want to grow by 1 acre, we got to find 3 acres for you. If you want to grow by 3 acres, you got to find 1 acre for us, and vice versa. That ratio is locked. The Maasai, like I told you, that are the pastoral Maasai, that population in Tanzania, they're growing. Their population exploded. So their needs are there, but because this control is in place, now they have human wildlife conflict between their livestock and the lions. So now everybody's losing. Right? Now their voting rights are being taken away because the land isn't recognized as theirs anymore. And now it's gonna get toxic, for lack of better words, because these controls weren't in place. Right? Controls that basically say a bylaw that says that this is what happens long after we're gone. And anybody who says, well, that's not possible, well, what do you call the Constitution?
Right.
What do you call the Bill of Rights? When did Peru come up with their Constitution?
When did Peru come up with the Constitution? It was back in 1821.
Okay, and when was when was it ratified?
When?
Yeah, like most recently, when Fujimori, was there a new constitution after Fujimori?
No, ever since 1992 Constitution, there hasn't been a new one written. There has been some adjustments.
But is that the same constitution from 1891?
You mean 1975, is it, from Mr. Velasco Alvarado? There has some change.
There's changes, but when was the Constitution first written?
When was the first Constitution written? Back in 1821.
And 1821, and has it changed drastically from that?
For sure, different times, complete different times.
But there still is a Constitution, right?
There's a Constitution, of course.
So anybody right now who's shaking their head right now and saying, and I'm sure there's many of you who are saying, no, no, come on, this just sounds idiotic. Okay, hang on. Peru has had how many presidents in the last 10 years?
Eight,
8 presidents in 10 years, 11
7
presidents,
to 8.
11 presidents in the last 20 years,
Yes.
basically, right? Yet the Constitution, no matter how many times people have wanted the Constitution abolished, it hasn't been. It's no, you can't. You cannot. There is rules against that. Those controls existed, right?
That's a controversial topic because a lot of us believe that the current constitution that we have from 1992, made by Fujimori, by the way, yes, and his people, is actually one of the best in the area. But as law dictates here in Peru, there's always a law and there's always a way to make it around.
Sure.
Yeah, so I personally believe that there could be some adjustments done, but not a whole constitution needed to be done from scratch. And that's exactly what our past president and the ones before, led by, I guess, some sort of leftist wave, wanted to do in order to take control of the power, which you don't do that.
So think about this for a second. Think about this for a second. This is a country that has had 8 presidents in 10 years, 11 presidents in 21 years, yet the Constitution still exists. Yeah, there's ways around the Constitution in every country, including ours. There's ways around there in every country, but it still has, it's like home base. You still get to come back to it. So if that can happen on a country level, and this is a country that is, how many presidents have you had, right? I mean, you haven't had, your 1821. When you look at us as Peru as a democracy, it's not as old as other countries in the world.
No, not at all.
Yet the constitution's here. Kenya has a constitution in place. Kenya hasn't even had 10 presidents yet.
Mm.
They've been independent since 1963. India has been independent since 1948. But you start thinking about these young economies and these young countries that do have this. They have tons of dysfunction. I get it. But they have it. Look at Chile, right? Once Pinochet was removed from Chile, you had a new constitution showing up there as well. Right? You had new movements there. Again, so I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about the politics side of it. I'm talking about the fact that a home-based document or a stable document, it does exist. So if it can exist at a country level, why can't it exist on an indigenous level? Why can't a centralized voice? And that's so we've talked about 2 specific solutions here, and what better place to talk about it than Peru, with a gorgeous sunset about to happen behind us, right? And a place where you can hear the birds, the wind. You're connected with nature in ways that one would wish. And you can hear, like, as I'm talking to you, I can feel the wind just touching the hair on my arms. I could feel all of that. Your senses are heightened as you're doing this. And that's partially because as I'm listening to what you're saying about Alaska and what you're saying about Peru, we need to get this episode out to people just to get a conversation going. You said it the right way. It's a start. So the start has to be 2 specific solutions, a collective voice, right? Whether it's Maasai and different communities in Samburu, Maasai, whatever the case in Tanzania or Kenya, you can have a collective. Something like the Northern Rangelands Trust can be applied. When you're talking about what's happening in Peru or in Chile, what's being practiced in Alaska can be applied here. It's not easy. Nobody said it was. If it was, everybody would do it. So nobody said it was. But the person or the group of people who actually figure out how to make this work will be remembered for eternity. I mean, that's a seismic shift in how society works. And look, will it happen? Nothing's impossible. But the way that our podcast audience is growing, at the rate at which it's growing right now, it's clearly resonating with listeners. What we're saying is clearly resonating. So have a conversation with somebody. Share this episode. Forget about having them listen to the podcast. We'd love to have them listen, obviously, as well, and love to have them follow us as well. But just start the dialogue. Because if you start dialogue with one person, they with another, they with another, they with another, they with another. For example, we talked about the land in Patagonia. You are here in Peru and you heard about that. And you heard about it in the local news here.
Mhm.
Where would they have heard about it? Somebody said something to somebody who said something to somebody who said something to somebody who said something to the right person.
I guess, yes.
Right? I mean, that's essentially it. Right? Leigh,
Yep.
you know more about Alaska than I do, than most people do.
Yeah.
You figured out what's happening here with the cruise line, with the Native Corporation, and you figured all these things out. But how are you getting your news? How, besides what you're reading, how else are you seeing what's happening there? Do you?
Just from people I know who
There
are,
you go.
intimately involved
There you
in
go. There you
the,
go.
yeah.
There you go.
Mhm.
Somebody said something to somebody who said something to somebody who said something to somebody who said something to the right person. I
Mhm.
have a question for you. You know people who are intimately involved in the Native Corporation of Alaska, right?
Mhm.
How well do you know them?
Pretty well.
Can we get them on this episode, on this podcast?
Maybe so. We'll
I
see.
would
Yeah.
love to have their thoughts on this. And if we have to create a third episode on this topic, just to hear their thoughts, I think it would behoove our listeners. It would behoove us to
Mhm.
listen to what they have to say. They're in the room,
Yeah.
right? They're present. They're in the room. They can probably share insight. In fact, they definitely can share insight that we probably haven't thought about. But here we are, outsiders, with two clear solutions. I get it. They're pie in the sky solutions, but then they're a broad stroke. But that's where a painting starts, is with a broad stroke.
Mhm.
You can't start a canvas without that broad stroke.
Yeah.
So
Ashish para presidente.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I keep telling him, Chris.
Oh.
He's always like, "Who should do it?" I say, "You should do it. You're the one with the clear vision. You should do these
I
things."
wasn't born in the US. I can't do it.
Yeah, but you can facilitate. I mean, look at, yeah, there's plenty of world diplomats who've been out there and brokered deals all over the world who weren't
I
native
tell you
to
what,
that country. Sometimes it takes someone with a perspective from,
I'll make a deal with you. We get this podcast to 100,000 listeners. I'm out. I'll go do it right now.
Okay.
That's my deal. How's that? Then no problem. I'm not the guy I'm not the Monday morning quarterback. I am the guy I want to be in that room. I desperately
Yeah.
want to be in that room. You know me.
Yeah, I do.
Want to be in that room. It's just finding somebody who's willing to listen and not look at me like I have five eyes. It's there. What is this nut job talking about now? So, okay. We've got some great solutions at play here. And that's what this podcast is about. Remember, we talked about, I say this almost at every episode. This podcast, if you want entertaining podcast and you want entertaining, we're there. But if you want funny, funny, Penn and Teller have a podcast, go knock yourself out. Go knock yourself out. This is about critical thought. This is about making sure that when you're done listening to us, you are stopping and you are thinking about what's real. You are thinking, you're maybe even rethinking your own priorities. I mean, Chris, your first podcast, what are your initial thoughts after listening to what we talk about here?
This is great, being able to be heard by many people. May not necessarily have the right solutions for absolutely everything. Who has? But it's about sharing all of these ideas, and hopefully we'll all get to an understanding and that union that got stuck in my mind that you said that all of us need.
So, critical thought just happened here.
Yeah.
So, when you go to your wife, you're going to probably talk to her about this too, right?
Of course.
You talk to your brother
Can't
about
wait.
this. See?
Seriously, I'll share with them all.
That's all we're asking. Start a conversation. I'm
Yeah.
not even asking you to write to your congressman or write to your elected leader. I'm just asking you to start a conversation around a fire, having a drink, watching the sunset. Just start a conversation, and it's a conversation that doesn't involve who's the next president of the United States, because that's overdone. It's a conversation about what really matters. And I know I'm not saying that doesn't, but we have a lot of indigenous communities around the world who have been suffering during past presidents and will suffer during future presidents, because that conversation never starts. Start that conversation.
Yeah.
What do you
All
think for
right.
our first on location recording? How's that?
Yeah, good job. Good job.
Look at that. Well,
Ashish and his traveling podcast.
yeah, you're right along there with me.
I like it.
You're the adult in the room.
Oh
So
God. That's a heavy load to carry.
I mean, you do it well, so it's there. So again, thank you everybody for listening. I'll end you with this thought. If you start a conversation, watch the person's eyes, like I was looking at Chris. You could see it was resonating.
Mm-hmm.
You could see that right now the brain's moving. I can see smoke coming out of the ears a little bit as well. but there's movement. There's something happening.
Yeah.
That's what this is about. If you want to be a big success in a small place, you want to be a success and you want to be that success and be that change where you live, the critical thought part comes first. Have that uncomfortable conversation. It's not going to be an easy conversation.
Or
Doesn't mean
walk
it
the
shouldn't
10
be.
miles down the mountain.
That's a great way of putting it. Walk the 10 miles down the mountain. Be able to do that so you're actually able to see it. So be the change you want to be.
Yeah.
Till next time.
All right. Thanks.
Be the change or be the slave.
Oh, that's a good.
You know what? Okay, Leigh, we're using that from now on. That's the one.
I like it.
All right, we're doing it. That's the one. That is our closing from now on. Wow. Look at that. He comes in one time and he's like, home run right at the end. Well done.
That good zinger at the end. All right.
That's sticking. All right, you heard it. That's it, folks.
We heard it. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Sustainable Voice. If you have a success story of your own, please reach out and share it with us. Would love to hear from you. See you next time.